Hello and welcome to the Scotland Rugby News podcast with me, your host, Bruce Aitchison, and my partner in crime, the one and only editor extraordinaire, Gavin Harper. Hello, sir. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I'm thankfully indoors and hiding from this orange thing in the sky. It's incredible.
Yeah, you please be careful. I worry about you every day when the sun's shining. This week I've been worried. I've been getting you to message me every 10 minutes to make sure you're okay and you've not burnt a crit. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsor. The Scotland Rugby News podcast is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV now. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. Start your search today. So, more people that don't need S1 Jobs, Gav. George Horn, re-signed, top scorer. DTH van der Merwe, who's he?
Who is he? Yeah, no, brilliant. And what a way to do it. I was worried at one point in the first half of the game that George was going to score a horrible pick and go, nothing try, and then to actually run one of the sort of George Horn inside line support and then get the ball and be able to give it sort of the big celebration and stuff was a pretty cool way to do it. We spoke to him after and he was obviously delighted, but class. And look, I think that's a record he'll look back on and say, with a lot of pride when he finishes. But it probably won't get the full kind of extent of the achievement just now. But look, I think it's great, and he's been a great player for Glasgow over the years, and I think signing him up for another couple of years makes total sense. He did say that it was either that or become a PE teacher, so I think Glasgow will be pretty glad to keep him around.
He's there's so much. Obviously, I'm part of the George Horn fan club, and I talk about him pretty much every week. But I still think him as young. He's still full of energy and enthusiasm. He still looks like he just absolutely loves it. I think he's now in the minority of people who looks like he enjoys playing. So many players, it looks like it's their job and they have to frown and scowl and give media answers and all. George Horn he's quite happy to smile. He looks like he's enjoying himself. I mean, no wonder he's scoring tries galore, but maybe it's helped that he's not really been a regular international because he's played a lot for Glasgow. And whenever somebody breaks a record, you always wonder how long it'll last. But it's taken a wee while to break that record. Somebody will come along, but we're also getting to a point now where folk didn't hang around that long at clubs. I just think there's so much about George Horn that's class. I wish he hadn't burnt his fingers when he was playing with a sparkler at Halloween. But I just think the energy and enthusiasm he brings suits Glasgow. He looks happy, and he's just always a threat.
Nah, totally. And actually, you saw a totally different side to George Horn in those playoff games last season. We were just talking about before we came on, away to Munster and away to the Bulls in sort of knockout games are probably not games George Horn would have started 3 or 4 years ago. He would have had to been content with somebody like Ali Price, Henry Purgos before him starting. George would get 15 minutes off the bench, maybe. But actually, he showed last year that he does have that control. He does have that sort of kicking game. He's really matured, I think, as a player over the last probably couple of seasons. I think Franco's obviously played a big part in that. But you just get the feeling that for all the rotation and for all the tinkering that Franco does with the team, when it comes to picking his number one side, you'll have George Horn at 9.
Right here, I'm going to butt in here because you just made a point there. It's made me think, and I lost all respect for Michael Owen when I heard him as a pundit once saying that managers didn't make players better. And I thought, what a ridiculous statement to make. But I don't, there's too many pundits, right? And that's a Bruce gripe for another day. And you've heard me talk about that before. But Franco, I don't know if I'm over-egging this. Franco's made quite a lot of players better. And George Horn, some of it, a lot of this comes from the individual, right? George Horn's a determined little, competitive little devil. So he wants to get better.
Yeah, totally.
I'm not sure he was really that seriously considered as a Scotland scrum half. And he was one of those, he was a bit versatile. He could kind of play 10, but he was always too wee and all. He had all those things thrown at him that he wasn't able to do. But then it seems like Franco said, but I can see everything he can do. And I, like you just said, he's matured. Now, I don't know then. Is it just Franco was there at the right time in George's career that George was maturing into the player he is? But I think Franco has helped quite a number of players become better. And the way that Glasgow play suits George Horn. So I'm not, there's a lot of teams in England maybe that George Horn wouldn't suit, for example, because of the style of rugby that they play.
Yeah.
But George Horn, I think, is getting better. Tom Jordan, I think, has probably got better. Sione maybe has got better. There's Kyle Stain. There's a number of players in there who were already good. Don't get me wrong; they were already very good players. But it feels like they've taken a jump forward, and George Horn is probably one of them.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's you mentioned a few of the kind of big names. That's without talking about Jack Mann,
Gregor Brown,
Gregor Brown, Max Williamson, Gregor Hiddleston. All that crop feel like, because they've got almost implicit trust from Franco that they know, right, if I make a mistake, I'm not going to be dropped for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they've developed the attributes that Franco wants in. Look at Gregor Brown, was a sort of 6, could play a bit. Even at Christmas, Gregor Brown was saying to us that he wanted to play in the back row, and then 12 weeks later, he's starting for Scotland in the second row against France. And a lot of that, yes, you're right, a lot of that comes from the individual. He's clearly gone, do you know what? Maybe there's not the opportunity in the back row that I thought there was, but the 2 guys in front of me in the second row are in their, they're kind of getting on a bit. So a lot of it's individual driven, but Franco's clearly got an eye. You look at somebody like Jarry, he's come from nowhere. I watched him not that long ago play Super 6, and he wasn't, he was good, but he wasn't head and shoulders the best player on the pitch. And he played, Toulon at the end of last year, and he was probably Glasgow's best player.
You're also, there's a number of players you look at, especially in Super 6, that you had a big question mark over. Yeah, okay, but can they jump? Can they do the next bit? Yeah. Can they go to that level? And I think there's quite a number of players in there. I mean, I think George Horn, and I don't know him that well, and I certainly don't know what it's like at Glasgow and change or any of that. Obviously, I spend more time at Edinburgh than anywhere, but I don't know what goes on at Glasgow. But I would imagine George Horn is a good guy to have in the gym, in the changing room, at training. I bet he's an absolute pest, but I bet he's in the best kind of way. He'll be a little niggly, competitive, cheeky, pain in the tonsils. Now, maybe I've got him completely wrong, but I just love it. I think it's class.
Yeah, I think you're probably hitting the nail on the head. And I think when you speak about that sort of enthusiasm and the fact that he looks like he's enjoying himself, I always think of his brother. And, I sometimes forget that his brother's now at an age where he stopped playing and been a coach for 3 or 4 years. But, if you watch some of the Scottish rugby footage from training or whatever during the Six Nations, the one voice you constantly hear as a positive is Pete. And that must, that has an uplifting effect on people around you. And you're right, George has that. I'm sure he's wants to be first in all the fitness tests, wants to be, if there's a daft race to the changing room, he'll want to win that. And
I bet he's calling the race. He'll be like my daughter. My daughter will go, Dad, race you at the lamppost, 1, 2, 3, go, and she's away. George will, and he'll be whipping folk with bibs, and like you need that. Whether you win or you lose, you need folk with that energy and enthusiasm. And I think he's class. And I don't know him. I've not spent really any time with him, but from an outsider, from an admirer, I just think there's so much there. And he's a hell of a rugby player that knows where the try line is. I mean, he just keeps scoring. And he's got, what's he got now? Another 2 years?
Another 2 years, I think, yeah.
So another 2 years, even if he only scores 5 tries each year, that just makes that record even more ridiculous, that he's still got time on the clock to go and add to it. I think it's class. And then, then you get Duncan Weir, who is like, and he's wee and he shouldn't be, but he just is he getting better under Franco? Like, it's mad that Duncan Weir, like, why is he playing with a broken shoulder? Surely he's been ruined enough. Like, lads, like, I need to come off. I don't care if you put a back row into number 10, I'm done. But there's so many stories that just make me laugh and make me feel good about that.
Yeah, totally. And that shows like that sort of unwavering commitment to, like, I'm actually going to put my, I'm going to put my body on the line. If come on as a sub, if I go off, there's probably not somebody that can come on. And then you probably would be in the situation of, you're reshuffling the whole back line. You've got a number 8 playing 12 and it's chaos. But he said, well, actually, I'll just take one for the team. I'll play 30 minutes with a totally busted shoulder, and then that'll be me done for the season. And he probably wouldn't, you know what it's like when you're playing. when you get an injury, if it's a bad one. So he would have had half an idea that he was struggling. He was saying that he was struggling to drop the ball to actually kick it, which is why he kept missing touch. So, like, it clearly wasn't in a good way. But, I mean, look, fair play to him. And, we get at least one more season of Duncan Weir, and we should all probably cherish that as much as we possibly can, because who knows when it's gonna run out.
There can't be many other 58-year-olds still playing in the URC. It's just...
It's incredible. What a man.
It's class. His shoulder hanging off. But so on the other side, Adam Hastings coming back, if he didn't have bad luck, he wouldn't have any luck at all. It's just unreal what he's had to deal with. But played well, kicked goals, probably feels like a new signing for Glasgow.
Yeah, I think the bit that I liked was that the Munster game, when he went to 15 and Duncan Weir was at 10, it all looked a bit kind of clunky and a bit of a mess. And actually, I thought having the two distributors, having him at 10, Adam at 10 and Tom Jordan at 12, gave Glasgow a bit more balance. But then, they still don't have Hugh Jones, they still don't have Sione. But it looked better. And then Adam kind of kept them moving in that first half. The Lions were terrible, but Glasgow were really, really clinical, and they played right on top of them, and they took all their chances. I thought it was great to have Adam back, and it'll be good for Glasgow going into the kind of knockout stage of the season, because, let's be honest, with no Duncan Weir, Adam's probably going to, and no Sione, you need Tom Jordan probably at 12. So Adam's going to have a chance now to play some really big games. And then that
doesn't get much bigger than Leicester Tigers.
Well, no, that's a pretty good start. So, I mean, what a chance to go and prove yourself probably against Handré Pollard.
And the Leicester game, this is where, like, that Lions game in some respects is maybe you never know, because it's only going to be hindsight where we're going to know, but maybe having a run out like that against Lions is good prep for Leicester. Maybe they needed a tougher test before. We're not going to know until we're out the back of it, but Glasgow certainly love bringing teams to Scotstoun.
Totally. Like, they've made it such a fortress almost. It is an uncomfortable place, I think, for opposition teams.
And supporters.
And supporters. Glasgow fans might not agree, but certainly those from the East might have not so great memories. No, look, I think getting a home draw is obviously important. I think if Glasgow fancy their chances of turning Harlequins over, if they can do a job on Leinster, but there's the flip side. Glasgow next week, we might be talking about Glasgow going to Dublin, and it's no RDS, so it would be in the Aviva, and Leinster will go fully loaded for all those games. So what a challenge that would be. But Leicester are not the team of old. They're not the Leicester of Martin Johnson's era, Neil Back, all those. But they've still got some pretty handy players. They've got
they're going through a bit of an identity change, aren't they? Because they were flying. They had an identity under the coaching team. Coaching team moves on. New coaches come in. It looks like new coaches are going to come in again. So there is a bit of transition. I think it's a really interesting tie, and it's one that's almost impossible to call. Like it could be 45-43. I think it's got potential to be ridiculous.
Yeah, I do. I do. I think you're maybe right, but I also think that if Leicester are going to win it, there's part of me thinks Leicester have to win it scrappy.
They'll kick the leather off it and keep it. Yeah. I think the ball, it'll be one of those Steve Borthwick, the team that kicks the furthest will win the game idea.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, again, going back to the point about George, like whether it's Jack Van Poortvliet or Ben Youngs, probably more better known for their kicking than George. So what a great chance for him to sort of show, look, I'm going to put my stamp on a big game. Not having Sione and now having Hugh Jones, not having Jack Dempsey is a blow for Glasgow. If you were handed the opportunity of being in these games but not having three of your best players, you take it, but it weakens them, I think, significantly. And I think that probably will tell, if they do make it through this weekend, it would certainly tell against somebody like a Leinster. But I think Glasgow will have enough to get through this week. I think they're a good side, even without those players. I think being at home makes a massive difference. I think Leicester, I watched them at the weekend and I was struggling with them because they've got some great players, but it just all didn't really work. And Solomon Akata had a bit of a nightmare. He kept dropping the ball and it just looked a mess. And they actually could have been sort of dispatched quite comfortably by Sarries, but they kind of hung in there. So, yeah, I think Glasgow will be too strong is the sort of my prediction.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because you got George Horn, and Glasgow would love to break the whole thing up, and I think we're going to have two contrasting styles. Leicester, how do we make this? How do we win by 3? Glasgow, how do we score 6 tries? And I think it's going to be an interesting one. And Lions are obviously in town. They're up here for a while. They must be wondering what's going on with the blue sky and sunshine. So that'll be completely throwing them off, wondering where they are. But they probably feel more at home in these conditions. Edinburgh against Dragons last week, kind of got there, won, scored some tries. Second half still wasn't. It was staring at a pretty big, convincing win second half, and then it didn't quite. It never just quite lifted off. Every time Darcy got the ball, obviously there was a bit of excitement. and Paddy Harrison, like, good luck. He had to have a parachute on to stop him running right into the Murrayfield stand when he was scoring that try. But he was desperate to score a hat trick before he got taken off. He was all over it, picking and going. At one point, I think he picked and went, presented it, and it was him that picked and went the next one as well. He was just all over it. And I was delighted for him because Paddy's had to, kick his heels for a wee while the last 2 months. So I was delighted for him. But the bigger news is probably Duhan and Marshall, Duhan especially.
Yeah, big. I mean, big news in every sense. Losing Duhan early doors was obviously a blow against the Dragons. Look, I thought they were, let's be frank, Dragons were terrible, like absolutely appalling.
They had chances though at the start of the game.
Yeah, they did. They did.
He kicks it too far, it goes over the dead ball line. All of a sudden, they got held up over the line. It could have. Now, that didn't mean they were playing particularly well, or they could have been 14-0 up.
Yeah, they could, and I think that's the worry. Is that even against a team, as you say, that weren't playing particularly well, and let's be honest, don't have a great record, like Edinburgh could have been 2 scores down within 10 minutes. And all of a sudden, what does that do to the psyche and, the atmosphere and all that kind of stuff? Yeah, but, they came through it. As you say, like Darcy's that team's catalyst. Every time he gets the ball.
Electric. He looked like he'd been kept in a cage for the last however long, and he was let out to play. It was unreal. Talking to George Horn's energy, like Darcy, but he actually got the chance with a bit more space, and he wasn't having to, front up physically. He was in the chip, and then to put the ball in his boot for Paddy to follow, and he got smacked. I was a bit worried when he got cleaned when the ball left his boot, but there's not many players, and he did it for Scotland. I think it was in the autumns when he caught the ball tight in the touchline and grubbered it through. The skill level and the execution at what is the highest pressure. I know Edinburgh against Dragons is not, but you get what I mean.
Yeah, totally.
It's in a game that matters. It's at the highest. I mean, it's at a speed that only Darcy Graham travels at. None of the rest of us are going at that unless we're on a train. And he's able to put on his boot. I mean, I thought he was incredible the other night.
Yeah, he was. And I think if you're looking, further ahead, like, does Duhan's injury possibly open the door for Darcy to go on the Lions? The closer it gets, the more I become worried that we're not going to get both of them. And I think Andy Farrell will totally back James Lowe, yes. So, there's a debate to be had there, but I think Darcy gives you those X-factor moments in basically every single game. I think some of the other points you made, Paddy Harrison's tries were impressive, but I actually thought apart from that, he played really well. Like his line out was good, he carried well, and that's probably given Sean a headache ahead of this week, because now he's, is he looking at leaving Ewan Ashman, who's probably been first choice up until recently, and then is Ashman struggling to get in the 23 now?
I get what you're saying, right? Paddy Harrison is a bit like George Horn and Darcy Graham, full energy, enthusiasm, wants to go, complete niggle, pain in the tonsils. For what I can gather, it got feisty at training last week. Paddy being the catalyst for that. But it's one of those, it's a South African team, so we have to go big and physical and experienced.
And I think that's probably... It could be the way, but then when I look back at the 55-21 game in Johannesburg, Paddy was the guy who kind of came on and brought Edinburgh a bit of something at half time. So you can never tell, but I get your point that Ewan brings that kind of size and set piece probably a bit more, but it's an interesting dilemma. I'm also interested as I think in terms of the Edinburgh selection this week, we'll get a lot of insight into how Sean thinks they need to play by who he picks at 9. I think one thing they talked about after that game in Joburg was that they kicked the ball kind of aimlessly, but they kind of gave the Lions chances. And Ali Price is clearly would be considered the better kicker. So does he come in at 9 and you get Ben Velikot off the bench? I don't know. It's all food for thought, but I think when that team comes out, you'll definitely get an indication of how Edinburgh think they need to play.
There's also an element to the Ben Velikot bit of the George Horn. He's a great impact. He's a change. He's somebody you bring on later stages when the game breaks up, and it's an unfortunate label maybe to have, and maybe he's not got that. Maybe that's just me making it up. But you know, when Benny comes on, there is a lift, energy and enthusiasm. You know, when the ref blows the whistle, Ben's looking for, right, can I go here? Can I spark something? And a bit like George and Darcy and Paddy, I love that. I love when somebody's ready to give a bit of a spark. Duhan and Marshall both went off really early. Both went off at the same time. I didn't really see the Duhan bit. I saw Marshall, and then Duhan sort of limped round and just looked like his world had fallen to bits. I'm leaving Murrayfield pretty, after everything's washed up, and I'm walking to my car in the car park, and this Fiat 500 pulls up, and it's Mrs. van der Merwe coming to pick up Duhan. Now, in the passenger seat was Marshall's partner, so she was coming to get Marshall, and Mrs. van der Merwe was coming to pick up Duhan, but the back seats were doing. That's it. Is that jokingly? Is that for Duhan? Well, yeah, because he's not going to get in here with his injury, so he was going to have to curl up in the boot of the Fiat 500 to get taken in.
Tremendous.
The life of a rock star British Lion rugby player. Get in the boot, son, because you're too big for in here. Love it.
Exactly. I mean, just exactly the treatment you would want when you discovered you've probably damaged your ankle and you're going to miss the next however many. And at that stage, you would have been fearing Lions and all sorts. And I think I am a bit worried now about Duhan and the Lions because, I mean, Edinburgh's update yesterday was pretty vague, let's be honest. It said he would be back in May, and that obviously could mean he misses 3 games. But it could mean he misses a lot of the season, and he probably won't play again before Andy Farrell picks a squad. So has he done enough already?
The squad announcement's something like May the 8th, isn't it?
Yeah, it's May the 8th in London, yeah. So, but how much weight do you put on the next month, and how much is based on the Six Nations and all that kind of stuff?
Who knows? Try to second guess Andy Farrell. But Wes obviously today announced that Wes Houston has signed an extension, which I think will make him Scottish. Is that right?
Yeah, so he'll be Scottish qualified at the end of his new contract, so just before the 2027 World Cup. And I think he'd be 30 or 31. I'm not. Look, like we spoke to Wes earlier in the week. There's the pieces on the site about international ambitions and growing up, wanting to play for the All Blacks, but his parents wanted him to be a Springbok, and now he might have a chance to play for Scotland. But he was pretty realistic. Let's wait and see how the next 2 years a long time in anything, and particularly in rugby. So let's see how he goes. But he would be a handy guy for Scotland to be able to call upon. Do I think he's somebody that Scotland are counting down the minutes to qualify? And I think the reality is probably not, given the other options, the younger options, and the players that can kind of move about.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably fair. It does make for interesting selection though, because there's been a number of players in the back three that we've not seen for a long time. Wes has been pretty consistent. Duhan and Darcy are your first choice left and right wingers. Now Duhan's not there. Matt Curry's had to stand there for a while, which I hope doesn't happen. I thought he was very good the other night, and then he got his try. His old man was was there for a bit of hospitality with 5 of his mates from Dumfries and Galloway. They'd enjoyed themselves at Malone's and the Roseburn Bar before they'd arrived at Murrayfield, so they were reasonably well watered before they were fed, but they were on good form. And I thought Matt did really well. I just think he's class, although he's pretty hard on himself. There was a couple of times where Dragons backs were sharp. They were quick, and they got on the outside, but Matt recovered, and quite a couple of times I think he actually recovered to his feet and got a turnover or got a penalty. But he was getting a bit of a hard time from Michael Todd, defence coach, for being beaten in the first place. But he doesn't often get beaten, Matt. He tends to recover pretty well, and he bailed out when Dragons broke through in the 22. It was Matt that came from 13 far away to make the tackle, create the turnover. So I thought he was excellent. I hope he gets a run. I think him and James Lang at 12 and 13 is the way for Edinburgh.
I think I said this to you last week about James Lang. Like, Edinburgh look a better team with him at 12.
He defends well. Like, I think it was maybe just me that he's not that big, that I maybe had it down as, but he throws himself around. He makes some dominant tackles, and he's hungry for work.
Yeah, I think James is a really good player. At that kind of, I don't think he probably has the same impact on a game as somebody like Sione, but I think he's exactly what Edinburgh need. He basically could be there all season long. Can help take a lot of the burden off a 10, I think, and get stuck in, looks for work, but can also take you over the gain line. They need to stick with him at 12 and Matt at 30. Like, the worst thing Edinburgh, I think, could do this weekend is say, we'll rejig the midfield and we'll get Matt back onto the wing. Just, kind of, it feels like those sort of square pegs and round holes and stuff, and it just doesn't work. Ross McCann came on for Duhan at the weekend. I suspect he might start. Other options are actually pretty limited for Edinburgh. You probably look at somebody like a Ross McKnight, who's only been in for a few weeks, a Jack Brown, who's very, very green.
He didn't actually get off the bench, did he?
He didn't, no, so it would be his debut, and it's a huge game. I think the one that interests me, and I don't know how many times we're going to talk about this, is Boff. Like, if Edinburgh can get Boff fit, and fit enough that he's not, by playing 1 week, he's not absolutely broken for like, I always remember the England and Spurs defender, Ledley King, would play on a Saturday, and then he wouldn't train again until like the following Thursday, one training session, straight back in. Like, I don't think that's a very healthy thing for person, never mind player. So, but if Emiliano Buffelli's fit, then get him in, because like on his days, he's world class and he would make a difference. But I think that let's not rush him back for the sake of it.
Boff, talking of like Adam Hastings, luck with injuries, Boff, the worry is he's not that player that you're talking about. Like, when he comes back, that he's not that player. I'd love him to be, because he's an amazing guy. What a rugby player, kicker. So much under the high ball in attack. He's class. He's a world class player, but he's not been a world class player for almost 2 years. Yeah,
it's been a long. If you look at, he played at the World Cup, but that is kicking on 2 years ago.
For Edinburgh, he's not been a player for a long time.
Yeah, and it was interesting actually. Again, there's a piece on the site when I asked Sean about Emiliano this week, and he kind of said he didn't rule out the club offering him a new contract. Now, whether that was playing devil's advocate and they've not come to that kind of final decision, but I find that astonishing, because for a guy who hasn't played for as you say, for the club for basically 2 years, to even be considering that, I think shows the value that they possibly see in him if they can get him right.
Yeah, I just don't know. It feels it's tough because you want to support him and reward him because he has been class and he is class, but he's not been able to show that for a long time. So how can you reward it? Yeah, it's that one's way above my pay scale, and I struggle with it because I think he's a fabulous player, and I think the boys love him. He must have had some pretty dark times though to be this far away from home and not getting to do the things that you want to do. You know, I know that might sound a bit that maybe sounds a bit immature, but at a time where you can't, you know, his mates are probably his colleagues, and he's not getting to do the things that they're doing. That's tough mentally and emotionally. That's tough. So, I mean, I don't know him, so I don't know how he's coped or what he's done or how he's filled his time. But training can be a really challenging way to be. So I hope when he, like you say, I hope when he comes back he's firing, because it would be sad for him to come back, not be 100 and something else go wrong.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm not even sure how much, you know, in the time he's been out and even the times he's probably tried to come back and then not quite managed, I'm not even sure how much training he's able to do. So he feels like a guy who's just there, but isn't able to do actually that much. And you know, one of the coaches and pundits and everybody talk about super strengths, and one of them's before the injury was his goal kicking.
Yeah.
Like, we've no idea how that's affected by the injury or the consequence of the injury, because we simply just haven't seen him. But from chatting to a couple of the Argentinians, you know, there was Edinburgh had Moyano at one stage and Sordoni at Glasgow, and I think it's now, I might be forgetting somebody, but I think it's just Seb Cancelliere and Boff. So even that community, you know, it's small to begin with, but having a few guys who speak the language, are all in a similar boat, that they're away from home, you know, that would have helped. I know they all met up kind of regularly. There was a footballer, a Celtic midfielder,
Maradona,
who was not
Claudio
him.
Caniggia,
who was
is it Lionel? Lionel Messi, is it? Was he?
No, not him.
Was he not Partick? He was at Partick Thistle.
Yes, he was at the big Glasgow club. No, and you know, they all met up and stuff. So like, even that, to not have that anymore would be like a blow. So yeah, it has clearly been a tough time. But now look, we'll wait and see what the team announcement brings when it's out tomorrow.
Good. Two wins. Glasgow beat Leicester, Edinburgh beat Lions. Let's move on.
Yeah, look, I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that Edinburgh can sort of get rid of some of the memories of that game in Johannesburg, and what an opportunity for them, because they would be back at home in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I think it's probably one of those things that a cup run, you know, you hear it in football, a cup run will make things feel a bit better. If Edinburgh can be, like this weekend, it's Lions, who are a URC team and might not necessarily get bums on seats URC time, but it's a cup tie.
Yeah,
like this hopefully this is exciting. It's, you know, let's see them win and go through to the next round. Let's get bums on seats. Let's get excited. Let's, you know, for both teams, I think Glasgow are lucky they're getting to play somebody outside of the norm. But that's just how it goes, because obviously South Africa are now part of Europe, and that's, you know, depending on what President Trump does, we might have other countries joining Europe as well. Mexico and Canada might come and join Europe as well. Just to let's not get political, Bruce. Anyway, two wins were taken. Scotland women, tough gig in France. It looked amazing. La Rochelle looked absolutely spectacular. Wishing I was there. It just looked immense.
Yeah, it looked class, and I actually was worried when the teams came out and there was all the fireworks and the stuff that you would probably associate with a men's international. I thought, I hope this isn't too much. I hope this doesn't totally overall some of the, particularly the lesser cap Scotland players, and there were a few of them. And I actually thought at half time, Brian Easton would have been saying, well, we've just scored, we're right in it.
13-7 at half time is one of those brilliantly Scottish moments where you're thinking, we're in this. Like, 40 minutes, like we're in this. France in France with that crowd, that atmosphere, blue sky, sunshine. Like we're in this.
And then there's a big moment a couple of minutes into the second half when Lisa Thompson kicks the ball through for Emma Orr and she just can't quite get to it. Score there, and like I know that France won it comfortably, but it's that whole bit about France in France, and you start playing on top of them, and you're in front on the scoreboard. How long does a 15,000 in La Rochelle give that before they've got bits of newspaper or hankies out and they're throwing them on the pitch, and you know it starts to get pretty hostile for the French. Do I think Scotland, even if Emma Orr had scored that, would have won? Probably, let's be honest, probably not. It would have made a big difference, I think, psychologically. And I think Rachel Malcolm spoke after the game. What happened was probably showed the step that Scotland have still got to take, in that they missed a chance. They basically didn't play for 10 minutes. France scored 3 tries and the game was done.
Yeah, that period, you just wanted somebody to take a knee, get a carry, turnover. You needed something, because the French were just at it. They were typically French. Every pass was sticking. They were offloading. The speed of ball was unreal. But I think Scotland can be pretty chuffed to some of the new players. Did well. I was surprised when Jade came off, but then I'm not sure. She came off with, I think, 20 odd minutes to go, and it was Alex Stewart that came on for her, which is not exactly like for like, is it?
No. And I was surprised at that as well.
I kind of thought it was maybe a bit early, but then I don't know, maybe Jade was done. Maybe, you know, it had been a pretty big toll. I thought Emma Orr, yet again, I mean, one of the most humble humans on the planet, who has no clue quite how good she is and quite how much potential she's got. But for her to come from where she came from to do what she did was just ridiculous. And, you know, I think Helen Nelson's got better. I think Lisa Thompson's playing well and seems confident. I like Brebner Holden at 9, and then Katie Mattinson came on. I think there's a bit of depth there. The front row thought did a pretty decent job. You know, France are a strong team. Yeah. But I thought there was a lot, and then I was delighted for Evie Wills, because she's you know, the Adam Hastings.
She's got the same luck as Adam Hastings.
You know, to have so long, and then to be on the bench last week, but to actually get on, I thought it was brilliant for her. She's a proper cheerleader. You know, she played sevens as well, wanted to play. When I was down in Birmingham at the Commonwealth Games sevens, she was there as a spectator. She was there to see her pals playing. And a bit like we were talking about George Horn, I think Evie's one of those people that's great to have as a squad member, because she's good around the group and she's positive and she's a cool kid. Not a kid anymore, but no, I thought there was so much to get excited about, and a week off, maybe good timing. Italy took a pasting. I hope we don't get the reaction of that, but Scotland should beat Italy at home.
Yeah, you would think. Just before we talk about Italy, just to talk about the two that you were just mentioning, I'd seen this yesterday and I've got to get it in. Defenders beaten in the Women's Six Nations so far. This is just outrageous. Emma Orr's on 8 with Ellie Kildunn and plenty others. Then Emma Singh and Sadia Kabea are on 9. And Fran McGee's top with 20.
Wow.
Like, that is obscene.
Wow. You
know, she's more than double second place. And then tackle evasion percentage, no surprise. Emma Orr 62% tackle evasion, Fran McGee 57%. So, like, and they're both only 21. So yes, they're
but there's a typically Scottish issue, both men and women. How do we get Darcy and Duhan and Fran McGee and Emma Orr the ball more? Like how do we do that?
We play Tom
'Cause if
Jordan,
you
Finn Russell, and Lisa Thompson at 10 or 12.
but you're right. It is exciting, and looking at a Lionesses tour coming up, you would love to think, it will be English heavy. Of course, it will. Kira Bevan might go as a 9 from Wales. Jazz Joyce maybe gets to go. Ireland have now got a few folks sticking their hand up, and then you look at Scotland, and you'd like to think we've maybe got 4 or 5 in there who would go on a Lionesses tour.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the big positive from, like, look at 10 years ago, how many players would have gone and how many would have gone on merit and would have felt like I'm here because I deserve to be.
They wouldn't have gotten an English second team.
No, and that's exactly the point. So look, that's the positive side. The negative side is clearly there are still, that gap, I think, from England to France has got bigger. But I think the gap between France and the rest is still pretty significant. Italy, as you say, they got a pasting off Ireland, so they'll be desperate to put that right. With a week off to refresh this week, I think Scotland should be too good.
I thought it was a brilliant weekend for the Women's Six Nations. Wales to get 21,000. The Italy seemed like they're embracing it. Ireland went across, having had a good Celtic challenge. Scotland go to La Rochelle and having that atmosphere and occasion, I thought was unreal. I really hope folk turn up at Hive Stadium for Italy. It now feels like we're maybe sort of 5th and 6th in that bit, in the public support is maybe what I'm looking for. Yeah,
I think you're probably right. And I think, look, having that sellout game last year against England was obviously sort of exacerbated by the fact that a lot of those fans were Red Roses fans or family or whatever. I think to expect Scotland to be in the position to be selling 8,000 tickets from where they've been is maybe unrealistic, but you would like to think that with a bit of promotion and the way the team have been playing, you could get a good crowd at the Hive.
It's on a Sunday, which I hope, sometimes that can be a killer, but with club rugby still going, tournaments still going, it would be amazing to think that Hillfoot's Vixens and Stewartry Sirens and all these women's teams that are working so hard in clubland go, right, on the bus, let's go, we're going to Hive Stadium for a Sunday out.
Yeah, and I think we've spoken about this before, but I still think that there is an opportunity missed where these games are still marketed like in the same way as would be Melrose Gala on a Saturday at 3:00. Like, there's an opportunity to do something entirely different with the whole package, I suppose, and advertise it for a completely new rugby fan and say, look, if you've no idea what's going on, in the programme is a beginner's guide or is some handy tips or some laws or whatever. But I just think it's still too heavy on relying on people knowing about rugby and turning up. But you're right that the clubs also have to feel like they belong there. I think that's probably something like I certainly benefited from when I was like growing up. The ability to jump on the bus and go to Murrayfield and get a handful of tickets and go to internationals and stuff. Like, was amazing.
It would be class if the women's rugby fraternity now is working so hard. Their social media tends to be pretty good. If we could get those, by the time, even if you said, right, we're going to get that, there's going to be 20 clubs there. There's potentially another 300 folk coming to the game. It's anyway. That's for somebody else. I mean, when you see, so my buddy Stu Green, who's the manager of the Cabbage Patch pub at Twickenham, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's now the Red Roses patch, and they've got the mural on the side. They had press conference there for Red Roses. John Mitchell is there. Meg Jones is behind a bar pulling a pint. They've got Red Roses all over the place. They've got Jill Burns' jersey up on the wall. They've got just to see the way it's being supported. It's obviously a World Cup year and it makes sense, but to see the way it's being supported, I would love to see. I don't know how we replicate that. I don't know how we do our own thing, but I would love to, because I think these women deserve that support. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be class.
And I think the other thing is, and I've said this on other kind of platforms as well, is that remember when the Euros was down south, it felt like women's football was just about to kind of take off, and it did. And of course, England well helped. But it feels like rugby is now in that space where it's not a million miles away. And if England win the World Cup and it's in England, it could have exactly the same effect. And who would have predicted that when Gary Neville and Roy Keane retired as being footballers, they would be doing a podcast once a week with a women's footballer? Like, to be blunt about it, I think they would have sort of scoffed at that. But it shows that the potential and that growth that's kind of happened over the last maybe 10 years. And I think that's where women's rugby is just now, and I think the opportunity is massive. And if Scotland can have a good Six Nations and a good World, get out the pool at the World Cup, then they'll very much be part of it.
And that's the best thing about this. We weren't invited to the Women's Euros. Exactly. Scotland weren't there. We're at this party. We're at the Six Nations. We're in the World Cup.
Yeah.
We're not just looking for the ripple effect. We're actually part of that right in the core.
The other thing, obviously, is that it's accessible. It's not like the last World Cup, which was in New Zealand, and folk were having to get up in the middle of the night. It's on our doorstep, and folk can buy tickets and go with their pals or take their families or whatever it might be. So no, I think it's almost there, and I'd like to see Scotland get a bit of that.
Yeah, and just a quick mention for Christine Bellil, CB. She's sort of stood down for. We're not fully aware of what the situation is. We hope everything's okay. We hope she's okay, but she's stood down for the rest of the Six Nations. Yeah, and I think, like, first and foremost, I think she's a loss as a rugby player. But I think, when you see the post, and obviously some sort of family medical issues, that kind of almost goes out the window. Well, it does go out the window. And you say, well, you hope the person's okay before and their family's okay and all that kind of stuff before you're talking about rugby. But yeah, from a rugby point of view, she'll be missed. I'm sure she'll be missed around the camp. She's a lively character. Who brings a lot of energy and stuff. So it'll be a challenge to replace that or replicate that. Molly Pullman did well in France on her debut. Yeah.
But I think that clearly is more than a rugby thing. So hopefully Christine's been a great player for Scotland, and hopefully we see her before the World Cup.
Yeah, I hope so. Okay, fella, great to see you. Loads on this weekend. A bit of a rest for the Women's Six Nations. We're back on it the week after. So, folks, thank you. A quick word from our sponsor. Scotland Rugby News Podcast was brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, and head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV now. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search today. Cheers, Gav. Look after yourself, my man. See you soon, everybody. Have a great weekend. Whatever you're doing, be good.